All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening in to this lecture slash lab. Yeah, we had enough people cancel, so I decided to just record it and post it on Canvas. We'll try not to take up too much of your Friday afternoon, and we're just going to go over a couple slides. Basically, the lecture that you would have had on Thursday that preps you for the lab that you're going to complete. And Dr. Turner will post that either later today or sometime this weekend. But if you have any questions about this lecture, about your lab assignment, please feel free to email me or Dr. Turner. We're happy to help, happy to set up a time to meet either on campus or virtually. Just let me know. So without further ado, we'll go into some of the slides. All right. So today we're going to be talking about kind of back. I know we've been doing some sampling in the field, but this is going to be much more of the design of this class. So today's content, we're going to be looking at data management, and we're going to be looking at sampling and design. So first off, data management. Why do we bother? Should we spend a lot of time managing our data, or should we just get out there and grab the data? And I'm sure you guys know, and as we talked about, you really do want to make sure you take the time to prepare for when you actually go out and collect that data. Because if you know what you're going to collect, how you're going to collect, makes it a lot easier for when you do those analyses on the back half. So this includes the recording and storing of data. You want to make sure to have orderly and well-explained methods because better methods mean better data. It means data that can be repeated by others. So if you're the one gathering data and you're looking at a 5-year plan and someone else needs to gather that data in 5 years, if you have well-explained methods that are easy to follow and easy to use, then you're just going to have better data that you can use into the future. And this is a huge one that I've run into in my personal field that you'll have, not calling out any agencies in particular, but you'll go and look at the data that they may have collected about, the trees or the vegetation in one area, and I want to use it for looking at birds. And they may have collected that, 2000 to 2010, and it's a mess. Some of it can be really messy. And so, really making sure you take the time to have those well explained methods and a good data sheet, as we'll talk about, can really make the difference between whether that data is usable or not. Now, it also, you want to make sure you have efficient collection. That's going to be less expenses for you personally, time, but also if you're hiring people. And bad data collection techniques just equal bad data. Kind of what I've talked about. If you're out there and you don't have the methods down, or maybe you just have a bad, technique that you're trying to run one technique, but you want to answer some other question, it's just going to equal bad data. And so you really want to take the time beforehand to make sure that you're prepared for going out in the field. Now, there are a few methods of data collection. Recorders are one. I've used these. It's less time in the field. It's nice that you can just hold something, talk to it. You can work alone, and it can record a lot of data. There are cons though, and one of the ones is the transcription out of the field. You have to go back and you have to write down all of that data that you collected still. There is and are some ways to get around this nowadays. Like your phone even has voice memos that you can record if you're talking, and you can also have, I know there's a lot of different AIs that can take that audio and then transcript it for you. But there are flaws with that. Some of them don't work that well. You could have a failure of your device. Your phone could run out of battery. Um, and yeah, there's also verbal description, sometimes that makes it difficult for detecting patterns and problems if you don't have a set rubric or what you're judging the data on or what you're collecting. You're just speaking as you go, and you kind of wing it out there. You might miss a lot of patterns or not have repeatability, as we've talked about. You can also have portable computers and data loggers. This is as simple as I've even used like iPads that have had a set data sheet on it. These are efficient. It's nice that you can write in the data and it just enters it usually straight into a database. You can integrate it with other data sources. It's easy to share that data. But there are cons. Again, one's a big one, which is cost. It costs money to do that. It's cheaper to print paper than to, buy 10 portable computers for your technicians. There's also weather conditions that can limit that. Maybe it's pouring outside. And you can also have failure of electronics, which means you could lose that data. And sometimes it's awkward in the field. There have been times where I'm walking, it's hot, and you have to pull out the iPad, click into it. Maybe the brightness on the screen isn't high enough, and it's a really sunny day. So sometimes it can be a bit awkward to have in the field. And then finally, our trusted, our true paper forms. And there's some big pros with paper. It's inexpensive, it's lightweight, you can bring it everywhere. It can be waterproof. That does add a little bit of cost, but you can get waterproof paper. You don't need batteries, and you can just easily record other data on that page. So if it's something you forgot, you can write it maybe in the notes section, and you just have that paper with you. You have a hard copy, which is usually really nice to have. But again, there are some cons. You could have, you have to put it into a computer database then, which adds time and cost. The data entry and quality control can be time consuming because maybe someone that enters is not paying attention, they enter errors in wrong, or it just takes a while, and you introduce human error. And you can also have wet data sheets, and that has happened to me plenty of times if a random downpour comes, or maybe it's just really humid, especially down here on the coast. That can ruin the data. You can't see it as much. And you can also lose those data sheets. They're very, very easy to lose. And if you lose one of those data sheets, you're not having a good time. It's a bad time when you realize that. You want to keep them orderly. Now, one way we can avoid some of that data loss is to make copies. So if you have a data sheet and you take that data, go out in the field, collect a bunch of data, go make a copy of it. It's not that hard to use a copier. I'm sure some of you maybe have used a copier, maybe not. They're really easy to use. A lot of times, I'll just at the end of the night, if I'm collecting data, I'll just take a photo of the data sheets. And once I've entered them, then I'll delete them off my phone. Or sometimes I won't even delete them off my phone. It's nice to have those backups electronically, but also paper. Now you can back them up on separate drives. You can back up in the cloud and a physical disk, especially if you're using like some of the other, portable loggers or recorders. And one big one that I've added in is I put it in bold, enter them in a timely manner. A lot of the time, you can avoid data loss if you just enter it in a timely manner. If you go out and collect that data, I know you're getting back from the field. I know you're probably sweaty, it's hot, you're tired, maybe you're muddy, you just spent a few hours in the field, you just collected a bunch of data. You don't want to just enter that data. Enter the data because the moment you put those, maybe you took it on paper, you put those papers on your desk, and then you're going to forget about it. And it's so easy for those papers to be whisked away. If you don't make backups, it can be a really bad time because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to have to go back and get that data. So things to include when you're looking at data sheets. So we're going to kind of switch over to creating a data sheet. So let's say, you know what you want, but you need a data sheet. Some of the big ones: title, project. What is the project you're doing? Location. I like making codes for my location so I can find them easy. So in College Station, I might put like CS for College Station, and then I might have actually like a second location that's where I actually am. So like you might even put, if I was working at multiple sites outside of the ENRTA, I might put location College Station and then secondary location or site, I might put ENRTA. Or you might put as your location ENRTA, site one, two, three. Maybe you're working at different locations around and you want to keep track of that. Who's out there is important. The dates, when date were you out there? What kind of treatment are you using? Your transect and plot identifiers is a huge one. You want to make sure that you keep your transects identified, and so give them all unique numbers and put coordinates on where you are. And especially if you're using things like transects, you want to know, all right, this is exactly where I started, but where am I going with this transect? Because you can be in a site where you set a point and you run out 50 meters, and the 50 meters behind you look completely different than the 50 meters in front of you. So you really want to keep that in mind when you're writing down data sheets. And every data sheet's going to look different. Um, we have some data sheets that we posted on Canvas. I shared a few at that first lab, and so you're going to want to look over those when you craft your own. And I implore you to look at online sheets, look online, look at other people's data sheets because you're going to be the one that's creating this data sheet for your management scenario, and then you're going to go out and actually collect that data. And if you do not have a good data sheet, it's going to be a lot harder on the back end, and that's a uh, tough lesson to learn. So how are we recording data? Well, one of the best ones, clearly. You want to make sure that it's legible. I've met a lot of people. I've met great people with handwriting, and I've met people with not as great a handwriting. And so, if you're in a group and you have someone who's a better handwriter, let them write it down. It's not, it's not a jab at anybody, but it does make it a lot harder when you're on the back half and you go to try to write that. Or, if you have paper and you're trying to log it in later on your maybe Excel document, it can be a lot harder and you may mess up or create more human error if I think that all of their sevens look like ones. So you also want to explain how the data is recorded on your sheet. So in this case, because you'll be using plants, most of them are recorded by their USDA plant code. And so we've talked about a couple of them, like little blue stem, CSC. We've seen a lot of KR blue stem out there, which is boys. But if you don't know the genus or species, but you know the family, use the first five letters of that. And these a lot of times these are all online. Again, I'm a big bird biologist as well, and so we use a very similar method. We use a four-letter alpha code for all of the birds that we see. And note those units for measurement when you're going through and creating data, writing down data. How long did you actually take that transect? Or are you looking at meters? Are you looking at yards? Are you looking at inches? Make sure to note those measurements because that makes a huge difference on the back half with analysis and with people trying to repeat your data. You also want to have, something to consider. Make sure your data sheet's easy to follow. In case of mine, I have, here's the first thing I'm doing on a bird when I catch a bird. Here's the band I'm putting on it. Then we look at age and sex. Then we start doing the other stuff. That's the levels that I want to go through. I'm not going to go first, I'm going to put the band on, but the band number is going to be at the last spot in the data sheet because that just wouldn't make sense. And a lot of times, especially when you get out into the field or if you hire a technician in the future, they might not know anything. And so you might look at your data sheet, that you made, hand it to them, and you start listing off numbers, and they're just going to start writing it down in the order that they see it. And you might look over and see that they're writing it down completely wrong because something in your data sheet isn't easy to follow. And so, yeah, if it's hard to follow while recording, it's hard to follow while entering. And again, that's going to introduce human error, and probably you're going to have either errors in your data once you enter it, or you're going to have to spend a lot more time proofing that data. Think about how your data will be analyzed when you're creating your data sheet. And then don't make entry spaces small because handwriting does definitely get worse in the field. Now, in terms of data entry and storage, we rarely calculate values directly from the data sheets. A lot of times we're using some kind of storage software application. So, like, I'm not just looking at my data sheet and then, here's the values. And I know we did that with some of the density stuff, but a lot of times we're not just doing that. We're not collecting data and then you're just filling it out on the sheet. We're using some sort of software. So, word processors, I don't really recommend those, and I agree with Dr. Turner, who created these slides. Um, you have databases, Microsoft Access, Oracle, FileMaker. Some of those are very nice because they're in the cloud, and so as you put them in, they won't just disappear. You know that they're auto-saving. Spreadsheets like Excel, honestly, a lot of the things that I put in when I have to gather a lot of data and enter it, I'm putting it in Excel. It's really easy to just put things into Excel, put it into slides. You can create your data sheet a lot of times in Excel. And there are some easy statistical analyses you can do in Excel as well. But also Excel or .csv files go straight into R. And so it's really nice to put all my data in and then just push it right into R, where I end up doing a lot of my statistical analyses. And yeah, kind of like that, statistical software programs. So like SAS, SPSS, the big one in the wildlife sector is R. Or you're taking a spreadsheet and database and you're importing it in. Another big one, QA/QC, quality assurance and quality control. Errors occur in entry, and that's life. How do we avoid it? And kind of what I've been talking about throughout this is you're already trying to take steps to avoid erroring in these entries, by setting up a good data sheet, keeping legible handwriting, making sure that it's big enough. But there are some other things that we can do. One is data entered twice by different people. And a lot of times it's a great option. I don't do this that much because you have a lot of data a lot of times, so you don't have the time for two people to enter it separately. But there are a couple other things that I do, especially reading off the data verbally and entering. If I'm on alone, I'll read it off. I'll enter it and read it off, and I'll make sure that what I'm reading looks the same. Or if you have a partner, they read it off and you enter it. And so they'll read it and they'll look up and watch you enter it and make sure that you're putting in what they just read off. You could also do proofreading, which I always say is good. Uh, you need to do proofing with data entry, and so you don't have to have each person, enter it twice, but you should have someone, if they enter all the data, someone else independently should take that data and look over every single thing that you entered to check to make sure that it matches the data sheet. That's just proofing. It's a great thing to do. You should always do it. And then also subsetting a random number of records and double checking entry. So maybe you have thousands and thousands of records and you have a bunch of different technicians enter data. Maybe you want to swap and make sure they kind of check each other's with just a random number, maybe 50 entries or 25 entries. And if someone kind of pops up with errors, maybe you want to start looking more into their data entry and make sure to proof it a little harder. All right, so now we're going to be doing a brief intro into the sampling design. So how do we make a sampling protocol? You want to determine the species of interest or indicator of interest. And we've talked about a couple scenarios throughout the class. I know Dr. Turner has in the lectures. We want to make our management objective. So again, we've talked about objectives. And you could maybe look at specific species or maybe a group of species or maybe something over the area, some kind of objective that you want. And this could be again a location, an attribute, action, quantity, status, time frame. So kind of creating your management objective of when you need it, where is it going to be, what are you collecting, when are you collecting, time frame, how much are you collecting, and that's all in your management objective. And we've created them through the class. And so that's why we've kind of talked about them in class and had you create some. And knowing what species, where you're gonna collect, what you're gonna collect, and how much you're gonna collect, that'll tell you how to sample. Now you are gonna have to choose your sample unit and your method. We've again gone out and done them, which has been great. So are you going to collect density? Are you collecting frequency? Are you doing biomass? This is usually a quadrat or a plot. You might use, as we did some transects. And are you looking at cover? Are those lines, those points, those quadrats, are all important when you're trying to look at your objective and look at what you're going to collect. And then 4 and 5, you're going to choose a sample layout. So again, baseline, transect, macro plot. So sample unit, sample layout, and then how are you going to distribute those sample layouts across the study area? And there are a few different ways. I don't think we've talked about them in this class. But kind of distributing the layout, you can have simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, systematic sampling, and cluster sampling. And so simple random sampling is probably the one that you know or have heard of. where you're just maybe you have a big grassland and you're looking for plant diversity in the grassland. You don't really care where you sample as long as it's within, this big grassland that you have. So you just want to know what's out there. You don't have time to sample the entire grassland. So you throw numbers into a random number generator, you throw pins, and you spit that out, you put them onto the grassland, and then you go out to all those pins and you sample. And that could be, that could be a plot, that could be a transect, but whatever it is, you're using just random sampling to go out and look at it. It's unbiased, which is great. It's easy to use over evenly distributed areas because you can be like, here's my point here, my next point is over there, my next point is over there. And again, it can be easy to use. That's one of the best things, that it's easy and it's unbiased. But it can be inefficient depending on how your random samples come out. Maybe you're looking at a huge forest and you've randomly sampled it, and some of your points might be really far back in the forest or really hard to get to. Some of them might be just inaccessible, just straight up dangerous and inaccessible. And so it can be inefficient to get to those, or you might have to bias it. Um, it can also miss vegetation types. So if you're looking for a specific species, this is not one that I would probably maybe look at. You can still use it, but you might miss some of the vegetations, especially if they're very rare types of vegetations. Your random samples might just come out to, well, you missed it. And so if you're surveying a location for a specific plant, you're just looking for that plant, this might miss that. Now, the next one we're going to look at is systematic sampling. And again, this one's one you probably have talked about or know. And basically, that's just systematically you're sampling over a given area. And so I might, sample once here, and then I'll go the exact same distance away and sample again. Exact same distance, sample again. Exact same distance, and then this is my next sample. And you're going to keep doing that systematically. And so that could be like gradients in a forest edge, or across types where maybe you want to see the gradient across somewhere. And so you want to take systematic samples along that gradient to collect data as we go from a forest to a grassland, or maybe from one soil type to the other soil type. And you want to see like interactions, something like that. It can introduce some biases because it's systematic, and so where you start is going to influence all the way down the line. Um, and But it is again easy to implement, and you get a nice even coverage typically of the study area that you want. Then the next two are stratified sampling and cluster sampling. So stratified, you're breaking things down. So let's say you want to do multi-study, like a multiple study habitats. You want to look at forest, grassland, wetland. And there's 33% wetland and 33% forest and 33% grassland. And so you would break up your samples to make sure that each of them got a third of the samples you're going to do. Or let's say there's 30% wetland and 70% grassland, and you're just looking at wetlands and grasslands. You would put 70% of your samples within that forest and 30% in that wetland. And again, these are still random. So your, couple points that are in your wetland are still random. So you're still randomly sampling across the wetland, but you might do only 3 in the wetland versus, 7 in the forest. And again, those are randomly sampled as well. So it ensures that you're not missing habitat types. You are sampling them. It can be more efficient knowing, you need to be here, you need to be here. But it can be a bit more complex to set up. You need to know what you want out of the study. You need to know where your types are. You need to know what the site looks like. And it is a bit harder to analyze sometimes because of that, because you're introducing a lot more into the study. But yeah, as I talked about different study habitats, or maybe you're doing comparison and contrast, and you want to compare these two, grasslands. You might say, all right, I want to do this grassland and this grassland. I'm going to do random sampling here, random sampling here, and you're choosing 2 areas as well. And a lot of these you can mix a little bit depending on your question. Like, you could see how this could also like a study that used stratified sampling could also just use simple random sampling as well. But this one just ensures that those habitat types are being sampled versus, if you just choose randomly across the area, you might miss some, or maybe the proportions come out a little weird. And then finally, cluster sampling. It's good for large scale areas and it can be more practical, but you could also really heavily bias your results and it's a little less precise than stratified up above. So if you're kind of wondering what's the difference there, um, cluster might be that you have a large forest, you want to look at canopy cover, you've selected a few random large plots that are just kind of randomly chosen and so kind of looking at this left one, you have four things that they looked at. You're clustering those samples together, and then you're choosing two of those, units that have samples within them. And so you're kind of choosing one big spot that then you sample a bunch instead of picking a bunch of different samples here and there. And so this is a very old graphic, but I think it does a good job of kind of showing what each one does. So like random sampling all over, stratified random sampling, you're still random sampling, but within habitat types. Systematic sampling is again very systematic. You're sampling here, areas and areas. And then cluster, you're doing kind of clusters of sampling and you're randomly choosing where those clusters are. You're just doing more samples at the location. So again, it can be more efficient. So you don't have to walk around as much, but it can also really bias your results. So, all right. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and listening. I really appreciate it. Have a great Friday. Make sure to read over. You can reflect to this presentation, look at the other lectures that have been posted and such, and complete the lab assignment this week. So Dr. Turner will post that if it hasn't already been posted. It's a good one. It's going to be important. You're going to have to, meet with probably your other group members, and you're going to be creating data sheets and creating and looking at your management scenarios and figuring out what you want to do to answer that scenario. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for the next couple of weeks when we get back to ENRTA and you get to go out and actually use your data sheets to sample and answer your management questions. So really looking forward to it. If you have any questions, please contact me or Dr. Turner, and we can, set up a time to talk, look at any questions you have, look at what you've done so far. So just let us know, and I appreciate it. And thank you guys, and have a great day. So